Salute, my Quick Classics friends, and welcome to another episode of Quick Classics on February the 24th, 2021. And as always, if you like the content, please click a like, subscribe, and share. I do appreciate all the support and the growing number of followers, almost to 1,000, so let's keep this churning. And today, in conjunction with the Paneas series in Sunday School X, I'll be taking a look at some of the rites and the temples at the site of Paneas, Caesarea Philippi, and amongst some of the more interesting lesser deities, if you will, nymphs and dryads and things like that. They're actually on the north side of Paneas. There's an interesting setup called the Temenos, where all the temples were. This is a sacred space, sacred area, basically. And against the red rock cliff face on the north side of the city, you have a number of niches, votive niches that are carved into the sandstone, and they are dedicated to any number of nymphs, which, if you're familiar with Greek mythology, often associated with the god Pan. Amongst them were nymphs such as Nemesis, who was often associated with justice and recompense and things like that. Um, there are also some lesser deities that are worshipped in this area associated with the mythology of Pan, amongst them the goddess Maya. And Hermes as well. Not necessarily a lesser god, but probably lesser represented in the Temenos. Um, he too being one of the possible fathers of Pan in Greek mythology. And there was even an Asclepion devoted to Asclepius, who was actually a human uh, who later became divine according to Greek mythology, and was associated with medicine. And these Asclepions are found all over the Greco-Roman world as kind of one part hospital, one part shrine, essentially to pray for some sort of healing. Amongst the temples at Paneas include a temple to Zeus. And if you've gotten a copy of my book, Paneas, there's a chapter in there on the socio-cultural and religious history of Paneas, in which I talk about some of the inscriptions associated with the various temples, including the Temple of Zeus, and a number of the names of the priests are actually recorded in there. So if you want a closer look at that, I would highly recommend getting a copy of my book, Paneas, on that very subject. Undoubtedly, one of the most notable temples at Paneas was the Augustaeum. And an Augustaeum, as the name suggests, is a temple devoted to the honoring of um, the Roman Emperor Augustus. And of course, this emperor worship or emperor reverence of the genius, or the essence, the spiritual essence of uh, the emperors, became part of Roman public religion after the first emperor, um, who was, in fact, Caesar Augustus, if you'll recall your Roman history. Now, Judea was a vassal state of the Roman Empire as of 63 BC. That's when the General Pompey conquers that part of the eastern Mediterranean and hands it over to the Roman state. Uh, During the time of Caesar Augustus, King Herod the Great, was one of these vassal kings, and he built several Augustea throughout the land of Israel, and one of them was at Paneas. In fact, we get this reference from Josephus about where he builds it at the Paneion, which was the old Greek name for the region, dating back to the 3rd century. In fact, it's Pan is the entire reason that the city was built in the first place, to pay homage to this god. And so Josephus tells us that he builds it, near this yawning cave at the high spot in the city. And this undoubtedly was the cave that became the shrine to the god Pan. And although, as a footnote to this, I would say that although we've found footings and a foundation in front of the cave, and most of the artist renderings and archaeological uh, assessment points to um, the Augustan being in front of the cave. I've personally, as a historian and an archaeologist, I've never really felt comfortable with that assessment because none of the other Augustea are built in front of caves. Now, it's at a higher location, but it's certainly not the highest location in the city. The highest location in the city would be actually on farther on up the hill under which lies this cave. And so it makes more sense that the Augusteum would actually be above the cave somewhere at the top of the hill. Um, Surveys have not been ongoing for a number of years, over a decade as far as I know. And so I would contend that certainly there's a structure in front of um, the cave of Pan, but it's not the Augusteum. The Augusteum has yet to be found, in my estimation. Uh, but it's interesting. Why in the world would Herod the Great build this Augusteum to um, Augustus at a site like Paneas? I mean, you could understand some of the other locations in populated areas, but the city proper in the first century BC is not really there. It's not until the first century AD that this becomes a more thriving metropolitan area. My theory about this is that uh, Augustus's his horoscope was public knowledge at this time, and it was believed that he was either conceived or born under the sign of Capricorn. Capricorn, as I've discussed before, was associated with Pan, and so I think this was just another way for Herod the First, Herod the Great, to pander to Caesar Augustus. Um, and so there's a kind of astrological component to it, if you will. Um, Now, of course, the most famous feature at the site is the Cave of Pan itself, which was the temple. I mean, it was a natural feature that was used as a temple, because Pan was the god of shepherds and goatherds and natural things and wild places, and uh, it was thought that nothing more needed to be done. He didn't need a grandiose temple to be honored here. And so back in the 3rd century BC, when the Ptolemies had control over this, they and the Seleucids after them undoubtedly saw this as an auspicious site and associated it with Pan, and that's how it got its name. Now, I have all kinds of ideas about connective tissue to older events, like with the Watchers that I've talked about before, but within the Greco-Roman context, the classical context, this was the most famous feature of the site, was this cave. And we have extensive archaeological evidence of all kinds of votives. There are many layers going back to the Ptolemaic era, um, all the way into the late Roman era, of votive offerings, ceramic offerings being given to Pan in this cave. The front of the cave was literally littered with this kind of debris. And there were statues of Pan at one time within there. Um, in terms of worship of Pan at the site, probably the outside of the votive offerings, probably the most gruesome element of this was human sacrifice, because we know that at one time the river, the spring there, gushed forth from the cave mouth and joined up with the river, and so um, that there was a waterway in the cave itself, in the temple. And what the priests would do is that they would take the sacrificial victims and throw them into the pool, and the current would pull them under the rock, obviously into the actual aquifer, and it was thought that if Pan was pleased with the sacrifice, then um, you would not see any other outside evidence. But if blood turned up in the river that coursed outside, then it was believed that this was not an acceptable sacrifice. So there's definitely a gruesome element to Pan worship at Paneas. And undoubtedly, because the Roman Lupercalia was the festival devoted to Pan, this was probably the most important festival associated and celebrated uh, at Paneas. And just in summation, I've talked about the Lupercalia before, but just in summation, it was took place on February the 15th on the Roman calendar, and it was essentially a way to ensure fertility and protection for the flocks of sheep and goats. And there was an element of maintaining fertility, of course, within the human population as well. But one of the interesting things about the Lupercalia was that it was done as a protective against not just wolves, but werewolf type creatures. And this doesn't get a whole lot of traction because it's not widely disseminated, but um, you can go and read about this, and I think T.P. Weissman writes about it. I think T.J. Cornell writes a little bit about it in his book on ancient Rome. Um, it's intimated in some of Livy's stuff as well. So high strangeness going on at Banyas all throughout. It's not just its antique history, but even in later periods. But speaking of werewolves, if you're interested in studying about how the demonic can manifest as werewolves, I'm offering the apprenticeship in preternatural morphology. One of the classes happens to be werewolves, and I still have one book to give away. If you register this week, it's $150 on sale. You'll get a free copy of the Book of Sabine Baringill's The Book of the Werewolves, which actually does cover some of the classical material, the Greek and Roman material on werewolves. So let me just qualify that. If you're the first to register, I've got one of those books left for a giveaway. There may be some more freebies later in the week, but I'll announce that. But for the time being, all three of the certifications are on sale for $150 each through February the 28th. So now would be a good time to take advantage of that. More and more students coming to me. This is obviously of interest to you guys. And it's of interest to me for a number of reasons, not the least of which are the classical history involved, but also as a believer, I'm concerned, of course, about the demonic and its many manifestations as well. So, anyway, there's a look at some of the temples and rites observed in ancient Paneas or Caesarea Philippi. And hopefully this will help you understand the history of the city and its biblical and historical importance as well. So we'll see you next time, and Godspeed.